I once imagined marriage to be more enjoyable. As I was immersed in my work, I suddenly found myself at the age of 43. Thinking about my old age, I shuddered at the fear of spending it alone. During such times, I met him, who was 2 years older than me. He was quiet, always a comforting presence, and gradually my heart was drawn to him. Half a year after we started dating, we got married and moved into a house to start our new life. We respected each other and lived by the rule that we could consult each other about any issues. Thanks to that, our marital relationship was very good, and I felt we were like a picture-perfect couple. Though we were getting older, our married life was going smoothly. However, suddenly dark clouds loomed over our marriage. One day, suddenly my parents-in-law decided to divorce because the children have become independent. According to my husband, his parents' marriage had not been going well for a while, and there was hardly any communication between them. Since my husband and his sister had grown up, I wondered, why now, but avoided delving too deep. As we were in our mid-40s, we thought, they must have various issues, but their divorce should not concern us. However, that fact heavily involved us. Since the greeting to my in-laws just before getting married, the relationship with my mother-in-law had significantly deteriorated. It was not clear what she disliked, but she was dissatisfied with everything I did. For example, she would say, "The seasoning of the food is sloppy," or "I don't like the cleaning schedule." If it had only been about household matters, it might have been bearable, but it went further to, "Your dressing is unfashionable," and even to criticizing my appearance. Eventually, it seemed like she was about to say, "I don't like your very existence." Naturally, I ignored it and tried to have as little interaction as possible. My husband agreed that it was the best approach. However, I was worried that my mother-in-law's anger might escalate and her attacks on me might worsen after the divorce, but I didn't think much of it since we kept our distance. In addition, there was another concern about my sister-in-law. She lived with my parents-in-law too. She didn't have a regular job and spent her time hanging out, and even in her 40s, she was still unmarried. I wasn't in a position to say anything about this, but she usually stayed home and occasionally did part-time jobs when she needed money. Because of this lifestyle, she hardly had any money, and every time she met me or my husband, she would beg for pocket money. I think it's problematic for someone in their 40s to ask for pocket money, but as family, we couldn't completely ignore her, and my husband continued to support her with small amounts. It was truly painful for my husband to provide financial support to his sister. However, since the amounts she asked for were just enough to buy books or a new game, my husband and I ended up giving in rather than resisting. When my husband learned that she was also asking me for money, he said, "If she says anything to you next time, let me know to protect me." However, my sister-in-law approached me when I was alone. So I couldn't ignore her and was always unable to escape. Eventually, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, whenever I visited my in-laws' house, acted as if saying, "The money tree has come," which was very unpleasant. From this background, we started to distance ourselves from my in-laws' home. I feared that the situation at my parents-in-law's house might change drastically after their divorce and kept wishing, "Please don't let us get involved." However, my wish was in vain, and an unexpected event occurred. A few days after their divorce was decided, the doorbell rang early in the morning. We were still asleep. Because it was 5 in the morning. Who could it be at this early hour, I wondered, half asleep, as I opened the door, and there stood my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They were holding large bags and grinning. I immediately regretted opening the door. And surprised, I asked, "What do you need at this early hour?" My mother-in-law ignored my words and said, "You're late. Let us in quickly." I hurriedly asked, "What's with those bags? Where are you going?" However, the conversation did not go through, and I was told, "What do you mean? Where are we going? We just came here." I might not have been fully awake yet, but I was perplexed by the two of them, who seemed to have fled from somewhere with their bags, pushing past me to enter the house. Unable to comprehend, I asked in confusion, "What? What is happening?" as I tried to stop them. At that moment, my mother-in-law, looking down on me as if I were an incompetent daughter-in-law, declared, "You should understand the situation, right? We are going to live here from now on." "Here? Live here? What are you talking about?" I have not heard anything about this from my husband. My husband would have consulted with me beforehand. I had just woken up, and with my morning low blood pressure, my mind was not fully functioning yet. For the first 30 minutes after waking up, both my body and mind are slow. Despite that state, I argued, "What situation are you talking about?" "The divorce." "But what do you mean by living here? I have not heard anything about it." However, as if it were natural, they pushed past me, brought in their bags, and started using the storeroom we had been using. Feeling my head clearing, I pleaded, "Please wait. This sudden development is troubling." Then, my mother-in-law glared coldly and said, "Our family is in trouble. Don't you have a heart or feelings? That's why you are a bad daughter-in-law," and she scoffed at me again. At that moment, the situation changed. My husband, who is not a morning person, rushed over, surprised at the presence of the visitors. "Why are you two here so early? And what are those bags?" he asked. My mother-in-law explained to my husband what she had told me. Feeling that it was appropriate for my husband to handle this situation, I quietly left the scene. Ignoring my husband's attempts to stop them, they began to spread out their belongings as if it were their own home. Although my husband tried patiently to talk to them, he eventually agreed to let them stay temporarily. This must have been a major concession for him. I wanted to throw them out, but they are his family. My husband understood my feelings and set a condition that they could stay for up to 1 month until the situation improved. Even though it was temporary, they were allowed to stay in the house and seemed to enjoy their days. We were forced to clean out the room that had been used as a storeroom for them. Furthermore, I had to prepare their meals 3 times a day at fixed times, like in a school. Moreover, they did not help at all, acting as if they were guests. If the preparation was even slightly delayed, my mother-in-law would sarcastically say, "Isn't it ready yet? I'm already hungry. Does this house enjoy keeping its family hungry on purpose?" I quietly retorted in my mind, "How can you be so hungry without doing anything?" However, continuing the conversation would only bring more sarcasm, so I chose to remain silent. At first, I cooked the meals, but gradually I began to question my actions and stopped. They hardly did anything besides eating, just lying in the living room and watching TV all day. They would order me around like prepare the bath and meals, and then would make sarcastic remarks to me, demanding bring coffee, serve snacks, vacuum the floor. After only a week of living together, I was mentally exhausted. Furthermore, my sister-in-law naturally said, "Please give me some pocket money," and reached out her hand. Surprised, I asked, "What do you need it for?" She responded childishly with dissatisfaction, "Why do I have to report to you?" It is hard to understand why I should give pocket money to a freeloader who does not help with the household chores. If I lectured her on the spot, it was clear that my sister-in-law would immediately report to my mother-in-law, and the mistreatment would become even harsher. Therefore, I kept my refusal minimal, saying, "You are not my child." In response, my sister-in-law angrily retorted, "You're letting your sister struggle." In this house, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law did not provide any financial support at all, and the cost of the meals they consumed was expected to be paid by us, as if it were natural. As a result, far more expenses were incurred than usual. Moreover, they kept asking for more pocket money. Nevertheless, how can they be so brazen? I had no choice but to continue this stressful cohabitation, enduring their unreasonable demands and sarcasm. Every time my husband came home, he would comfort me and sternly warn them, but their calm behavior was only temporary, and they fundamentally did not change. While my husband was at work during the day, they acted as if anything was permitted. Even after the promised 1-month period ended, the two of them showed no signs of leaving the house. Looking back, it was clear they had been planning to exploit my kind husband and use various excuses to continue staying. Gradually, their attitudes became more arrogant, and my sister-in-law started calling me in a childish manner, "Wife," but I had already decided to ignore them. Just hearing their voices was mentally exhausting, and I could no longer bear being imposed with various demands. This life is impossible. I'm at my limit. I must do something. I really might go mad if I don't change the situation, I kept telling myself every day. Around that time, just before my sister-in-law and mother-in-law arrived, my husband had achieved a great success at work and had just been promoted. While it was a happy development, my husband had been scheduled for a week-long business trip. However, he was hesitant about leaving, saying, "I can't leave you alone in such a situation." He said he should go on the business trip after the issue with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had settled, but I was also worried about casting a shadow over his career due to personal circumstances. Therefore, I decided to send him off with a smile to ease his worries a bit. "It's okay, it's only a week, and in the worst case, I'll escape to a hotel," I told him. My husband was still hesitant to decide, but I forcefully sent him off. I prepared myself to confront the two of them. As soon as they knew my husband was away on a business trip, they began to escalate their selfishness, acting like immature adults. Honestly, even young children might be more understanding. When the two of them called out to me while I was busy with housework, I tried saying, "Please handle it yourselves." Then, the complaints and grievances became unstoppable. My mother-in-law turned to me and said, "You're my son's wife, yet why can't you do even the basic things? In my time, arguing wasn't allowed. Your thinking is too naive." While complaining, the two of them seemed to be enjoying it. Seeing my troubled state seemed to amuse them, as if they were mocking me. I thought I must somehow control them, but how? While thinking about it, I began to devise a plan to silence them. 3 days after my husband's business trip, my mother-in-law again threw sarcasm at me. "Can't you even do what I told you yesterday? Are you really incapable of anything?" Finally, as I remained silent, my mother-in-law pressed on with an insulting tone. "You always seem dissatisfied. But what are you thinking? If you have something to say it clearly." I thought this was the opportunity to speak up. If I missed this moment, I might never get another chance to speak up. Since they were urging me to talk honestly, I decided to let out all my pent-up emotions. "Mother, it's clear you find pleasure in tormenting me, right? However, I am not merely a housemaid. At least maintain basic adult manners," I responded calmly yet firmly. As expected, my mother-in-law retorted, "What basic manners?" They seem not to understand how unreasonable their actions are. So I explained in a way they would understand. "You get angry if your demands are not prioritized over my busy schedule, right? This is generally called selfishness also. Demanding money without working is considered mooching. How can people who can't even follow these basic principles be considered decent? Since you are adults, please act more independently. Sister, you are already in your 40s. How old are you, mother? Or are you regressing into a child? Should I take you to a hospital?" What I said seemed unexpectedly blunt to them. They probably did not anticipate such a frank confrontation. Looking at me, they were taken aback for a moment, their faces turning red as they comprehended what had been said. "Don't speak with that tone. I won't allow a daughter-in-law like you to speak so impudently," she shouted. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law criticized me more fiercely than ever, and ultimately, my sister-in-law exclaimed, "If you can't serve us, you're just a nuisance." Then, my mother-in-law told me, "It's unthinkable for a daughter-in-law not to serve her family. Get out of this house." I was shocked by the phrase, "get out." This house belongs to my husband and me. It was astonishing that they, who were forcefully freeloading at our house, would tell me to leave. But I could not afford to lose to them in this situation. I could not give in. Desperately, I thought of my next move. Then it struck me, this is the answer. Although I would have to get my husband's consent afterwards, sending an email should suffice. First, I pretended to apologize deeply to them, saying, "I'm sorry, my words were too harsh. As an apology, I'll provide some funds for you to go on a trip somewhere. How about that?" I was confident they would take the bait. As expected, their eyes lit up at the mention of a trip, and they agreed to my proposal, saying, "That's fine." Then, weakly, I told them, "During your trip, I'll also be leaving here." To my surprise, my sister-in-law exclaimed joyfully, "Really? You're leaving? Lucky. Now this will be our house." My mother-in-law seemed unfazed on the surface, but inside she must have been pleased. I arranged accommodations on the spot, and the next day, I was able to send them on a week-long spa trip. This marked the real beginning of our strategic battle. Afterwards, I quickly informed my husband of the situation in detail, and he fully supported the plan I had proposed. As I had declared previously, I packed the necessary belongings and left our home. The destination was my parents' house, 5 train stations away. Upon arrival, I explained everything in detail to my parents, who were initially shocked by the outrageous actions of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but soon understood the whole situation and warmly welcomed us. I had rented a storage unit to temporarily keep my belongings, where I quickly arranged for movers to transfer everything. Thus, the moving preparations took place smoothly, and by the day before their return, everything was ready. During that period, I had not been able to sleep well for a long time and felt very tired, but fortunately, the sense of security at my familiar parents' house finally allowed me to sleep comfortably. With adequate rest, I was ready to face the important showdown the next day. Mentally and physically prepared, I was ready to handle whatever came next. On the day of their return, my phone rang as expected. I heard my mother-in-law shouting, "What is this?" and I felt right to keep the phone away from my ear. "Welcome back. How was your trip?" I asked calmly, to which she panicked, shouting, "What are you calm about? We can't get into the house, it's covered, and strangers are destroying it." As I anticipated her reaction, I couldn't help but laugh inside. I then calmly responded, "Ah, those are the contractors I arranged." "Why are they destroying our house?" my sister-in-law screamed over the phone, following in her mother's footsteps. Calmly, I replied, "It is inevitable. As I told you before, we are leaving this place." They were visibly shaken by this fact. When they returned, the entire house was covered with sheets and demolition was underway, making it impossible for them to enter. In response, I explained, "I simply acted as you wished. I packed up and left the house, that's all." When my mother-in-law urgently said, "Do something. We can't get in," I calmly explained, "I'm sorry, but you can't enter. Demolition has already started." Perhaps I did not explain enough to you, but this house was once handed down to me by my father, and after we decided to leave, it was no longer needed. It was economically rational to demolish the old building and sell the land. Initially shaken, they seemed to regain their composure momentarily. Still, they soon expressed dissatisfaction again, saying, "That can't be possible." Unable to bear their complaints, I replied with a slight laugh, "No, it is possible. It's my house after all. My husband is already aware of all the plans. Originally, this large house was too big for just the two of us, and this is actually the result you wanted. Isn't it? I have no intention of returning, and rather, I am enjoying my vacation." They were at a loss for words for a while. Breaking the silence, I explained the situation in more detail. "To tell you the truth, your belongings have already been stored at your husband's place. He is quite angry about the fact, so it would be better for you to deal with it sooner." Upon hearing this new information, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law finally understood the severity of the situation and began to panic. Listening to their responses over the phone, I gently ended the conversation. Later, I heard that they received even harsher reprimands from my father-in-law. Eventually, having lost their home, they reluctantly spent the night at a nearby motel. When they sought help from my husband, his usual mild temper exploded, and as a result, he gave them an even stricter lecture. At the end of his lecture, he resolutely declared, "I will no longer have any dealings with the two of you, effectively cutting ties with them." Since that decision, my husband has completely avoided any contact with them and kept his distance. The subsequent situation for the two, namely my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, became very difficult. Suddenly, without a place to live, they seemed at a loss, wandering aimlessly. For a long time, they moved from hostel to motel, but eventually, my mother-in-law started working as a cleaner in a motel. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law kept busy with various part-time jobs while searching for an apartment, and I heard from their father about her earnest efforts. However, for financial reasons, they could not find a stable residence soon and were forced to move from one relative or acquaintance's house to another. Initially, many people welcomed them, but due to their self-centered behavior, that welcome soon cooled, leading to frequent expulsions from their places of residence. My husband and I moved from our longtime home to a new residence closer to his workplace. The new rental property is very comfortable, and we are enjoying a pleasant life. On the site of the old house we demolished, plans are underway to build a new single-family home, and once it is completed, we plan to start a new chapter there. This will ultimately be our final place of residence,